The morning briefing on Galactic Council Station always started the same way. Diplomatic staff gathered in the silver conference room, while holographic reports flickered to life above the central table. Ambassador Teth of the Rilani Republic adjusted his 6 legs beneath him and studied the latest intelligence data with growing concern. Numbers don't lie, and these numbers were disturbing. Every human vessel that had entered Council space in the past 6 months carried enough weaponry to destroy a small moon. Cargo ships had hidden missile launchers. Science vessels mounted energy cannons that could punch through battleship armor. Even their medical transports carried defensive shields strong enough to survive direct hits from military-grade plasma weapons. Teth's compound eyes focused on the most troubling statistic of all. Human civilians carried personal weapons at a rate of 97%. Not security forces or military personnel, but ordinary citizens going about their daily lives. Teachers, doctors, engineers, artists, all armed like soldiers preparing for war. High Counselor Neth materialized as a blue hologram at the head of the table. Her elderly Rilani features showed the deep worry lines that came with centuries of diplomatic service. Ambassador Teth, you've reviewed the human files? Yes, High Counselor, the pattern is unmistakable. Teth clicked his mandibles together, a sound that indicated deep thought among his people. In all our records of galactic species, we've never encountered such systematic militarization among a supposedly peaceful race. The hologram flickered as Neth leaned forward. The other council members are asking difficult questions. The Valari delegation has formally requested restrictions on human ship armaments. The Korhan Empire suggests limiting human civilian weapon permits. Even the peaceful Mendi are expressing concerns about human intentions. Teth understood their worry. The Rilani had evolved on a world where cooperation meant survival. Their 6-limbed ancestors had built vast underground cities through collective effort, sharing resources and knowledge freely. War was something they had read about in ancient texts, not something they had experienced personally. The idea of ordinary people carrying weapons seemed as strange as breathing underwater. What are my orders, High Counselor? Find out why humans arm themselves so heavily. Are they planning conquest? Do they expect war? Are they simply afraid? Neth's image wavered slightly as the transmission adjusted. Most importantly, determine if they pose a threat to galactic peace. The hologram dissolved, leaving Teth alone with the troubling data. He pulled up visual records from the station's external cameras. Human ships moved through space with a grace that spoke of advanced technology, but every hull modification screamed of military preparation. Weapon ports disguised as cargo bays, shield generators built into decorative panels, communication arrays that could double as targeting systems. A soft chime indicated an incoming vessel. Teth activated the observation screen and watched as the human diplomatic ship Endeavor approached the docking bay. The vessel looked elegant enough with smooth lines and polished surfaces that reflected the station's lights. But Teth's trained eye spotted the telltale signs immediately. Those weren't decorative hull ridges. They were retractable weapon mounts. The ship's communications array was positioned for maximum targeting efficiency. Even the docking clamps had been reinforced to handle combat maneuvers. This was a warship pretending to be a diplomatic vessel, the docking procedure completed with typical human efficiency. Teth made his way to the arrival bay, curious to observe the human delegation firsthand. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss and the human ambassador stepped through. David Walsh looked remarkably ordinary for a representative of such a well-armed species. Medium height, brown hair showing traces of gray, wearing simple diplomatic robes that wouldn't look out of place at any council gathering. His smile seemed genuine as he exchanged formal greetings with the station's greeting protocol, but Teth noticed things that others might miss. Walsh's casual posture kept his right hand free and positioned near his belt. His eyes constantly scanned the arrival bay, cataloging exits and potential threats. When he turned to speak with his aide, the movement revealed a slight bulge beneath his diplomatic robes, undoubtedly some form of personal protection device. The human security detail was even more obvious. 3 guards in formal dress uniforms moved with military precision. maintaining formation around their ambassador while appearing to simply accompany him. Each one carried themselves like a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. Teth approached the group with practiced diplomatic courtesy. "Ambassador Walsh, welcome to Galactic Council Station. I am Ambassador Teth of the Rilani Republic. We are honored to host the human delegation." Walsh's smile widened, and he extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. "Ambassador Teth, the honor is ours. I've heard remarkable things about Rilani architectural achievements. Your people's underground cities are legendary throughout human space." The response was perfectly diplomatic, but Teth noticed how Walsh positioned himself during the handshake. Feet apart for balance, weight slightly forward, left hand free for quick movement. This was a man ready for anything, even during a simple greeting. "Perhaps you'd like to see our accommodations first?" Teth gestured toward the diplomatic quarters. "I've arranged for the finest suites available." As they walked through the station's corridors, Teth continued his observations. Walsh and his team moved like water, flowing around obstacles and potential choke points without seeming to notice them. When they passed a group of Korhen traders, the humans automatically spread their formation to prevent being surrounded. When they entered an elevator, Walsh positioned himself where he could see both the doors and the control panel. Everything about their behavior suggested people who expected trouble at any moment. Not paranoid exactly, but constantly alert in a way that spoke of long practice and hard-learned lessons. The diplomatic quarters were spacious and well-appointed, with viewing windows that looked out onto the star-filled darkness of space. Walsh admired the view for a moment before his team began their own inspection of the rooms. They moved systematically, checking corners and exits with professional thoroughness. "Security conscious," Teth observed mildly. Walsh shrugged, but his eyes never stopped moving. "Old habits. We prefer to know our surroundings." "Of course. I hope you'll find time to experience our cultural district during your stay. Many species consider it one of the galaxy's finest examples of cooperative art and architecture. I'd enjoy that very much." Walsh finally focused his full attention on Teth. "I understand you're interested in learning about human customs and culture?" Teth clicked his mandibles in agreement. "The Rilani people believe that understanding leads to friendship. We're curious about your ways." There it was, a slight tightening around Walsh's eyes, a barely perceptible shift in posture. The human diplomat was suddenly on guard, though his smile never wavered. "We're always happy to share our culture with new friends, Ambassador. Perhaps we could arrange a formal cultural exchange session tomorrow?" "I would be honored." Teth bowed in the Rilani manner. "Until tomorrow, then." As he left the diplomatic quarters, Teth's mind raced with new questions. Walsh had been friendly and cooperative until the mention of human customs. Then something had changed. Some invisible barrier had gone up. What were humans hiding about their culture that required such careful protection? The answer, Teth suspected, lay in understanding why an entire species felt the need to arm itself so thoroughly. Tomorrow's meeting would be just the beginning of what promised to be a very interesting investigation. Walking back through the station's corridors, Teth couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The humans acted like people who had learned hard lessons about trust and safety. But what could have taught an entire species to be so constantly prepared for danger? The numbers in the morning briefing took on new significance. This wasn't about aggression or conquest, this was about fear. But fear of what? The diplomatic meeting room on level 7 had been designed by committee, which meant it satisfied no one but offended none. Neutral gray walls displayed shifting patterns of peaceful colors, while the air recyclers hummed quietly in the background. Ambassador Teth arrived early, as was his custom, and spent several minutes arranging his notes and reviewing his carefully prepared questions. Ambassador Walsh entered precisely on time, another mark of human efficiency that Teth was beginning to recognize as a pattern. The human diplomat wore different clothes today, a dark blue jacket that looked formal yet somehow practical. His aide followed at a respectful distance, carrying a slim datapad and maintaining the same alert posture Teth had noticed the day before. "Ambassador Walsh, thank you for making time in your schedule." Teth gestured toward the curved seating arrangements that could accommodate different species comfortably. "I hope you found your quarters satisfactory." More than satisfactory, thank you. The view of the Helix Nebula from my window is spectacular. Walsh settled into his chair with fluid ease, but Teth noticed he chose the seat that provided the best view of both entrances to the room. I understand you have questions about human culture? Teth activated his recording device with a casual gesture. The Rilani people have always believed that knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. We're eager to learn about humanity's path to the stars. A noble philosophy. Walsh smiled, but his eyes remained watchful. What would you like to know? Perhaps we could start with something simple. Human ships seem remarkably well equipped for their stated purposes. Your diplomatic vessel, for example, carries impressive defensive capabilities. Walsh's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of his attention. Space travel involves certain risks: meteor showers, solar flares, equipment, failures. We believe in being prepared. Of course, but some of your preparations seem quite comprehensive. Energy weapons capable of planetary bombardment, for instance. Defense against larger threats. Pirates still exist in some sectors, and there are always unknown dangers in unexplored space. Walsh's tone remained pleasant and reasonable. Surely the Rilani understand the value of caution. Teth filed away the deflection and tried a different approach. Your people's history fascinates us. The records show that humans achieve spaceflight despite significant internal conflicts. Every species faces challenges on their path to the stars. Humans are no different. Walsh leaned back slightly, a gesture that might seem relaxed but actually improved his position for quick movement. We've learned from our mistakes and grown stronger as a result. Another polite non-answer. Teth clicked his mandibles in frustration, then caught himself and transformed the sound into what he hoped passed for thoughtful consideration. Walsh was too skilled a diplomat to reveal anything accidentally, and direct questioning was clearly not going to work. I have a confession to make, Ambassador Walsh. I've never seen anything quite like human space technology. Would you be willing to give me a brief tour of your ship? For educational purposes, of course. Walsh hesitated for perhaps half a second, barely noticeable unless someone was watching for it. I'd be happy to show you the diplomatic sections. Security protocols, you understand. Of course. The walk to the docking bay gave Teth another chance to observe human behavior patterns. Walsh moved through the station like he owned it, confident and relaxed. But his path took them past every security checkpoint and emergency station along the route. His aide maintained perfect position to watch their back trail while appearing to simply follow along. The Endeavour looked even more impressive up close. The hull gleamed under the docking bay lights, and the ship's lines spoke of both beauty and deadly efficiency. Walsh led them through the main airlock into a corridor that could have belonged on any diplomatic vessel in the galaxy. Comfortable, well-appointed, and completely unremarkable. Our main conference room. Walsh gestured to a spacious chamber with a polished table and comfortable seating for various species. We host a lot of cultural exchange meetings during our travels. Teth admired the room while mentally noting the reinforced walls and the way the furniture was positioned to provide cover if needed. Very impressive. Are those Earth materials? Some of them. We try to carry a piece of home with us wherever we go. Walsh moved to a display case containing what looked like cultural artifacts, artwork, books, musical instruments. These represent different aspects of human civilization. As they toured the diplomatic sections, Teth gradually realized what he wasn't seeing. No weapons visible anywhere, but plenty of places where weapons could be hidden. No obvious military equipment, but everything built to military standards. The ship felt like a sword sheathed in silk, beautiful and peaceful on the surface, deadly underneath. Your engineering is remarkable, Teth commented as they passed what was obviously a heavily reinforced bulkhead disguised as a decorative panel. Very aesthetic. Form and function working together. We believe that just because something is practical doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. Walsh's tone carried genuine pride. Would you like to see our cultural center? We have a small library and art gallery. The cultural center occupied a significant portion of the ship's forward section. Books, music, and artwork from dozens of human cultures filled the space with warmth and character. Teth found himself genuinely impressed by the diversity and creativity on display. "This is wonderful. Your species has produced remarkable artistic achievements." He paused beside a display of ancient Earth instruments. "Music seems very important to humans. Music speaks to something deep in the human soul. It connects us to each other and to our past." Walsh picked up what looked like a stringed instrument. "This is a guitar. Every human ship carries at least a few musical instruments, even military vessels." Again, that tiny hesitation. "Music helps maintain morale during long voyages. It reminds us what we're protecting. Protecting. Not exploring, not trading, not diplomacy. Protecting." Teth filed that slip away for later consideration. They were interrupted by a soft chime from the ship's communication system. Walsh touched a panel on the wall, and his aide's voice filled the room. "Ambassador, Station Control is reporting a minor emergency in Section C hull breach in a maintenance area. All ships are being asked to prepare for possible evacuation procedures." Walsh's transformation was immediate and stunning. The relaxed diplomat vanished, replaced by someone who moved with military precision and spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. "Threat assessment? Minimal. Station reports containment in progress. Estimated repair time 2 hours. Acknowledged. Maintain readiness level 2 until all clear." Walsh turned to Teth, and for a moment the human's true nature showed through his diplomatic mask. "I apologize for the interruption, Ambassador. Perhaps we should return to the station?" As they made their way back through the ship, Teth observed the crew's response to the emergency alert. Every human they passed had shifted into the same state of controlled alertness. Not panic, not fear, but professional readiness. They moved, like a military unit despite wearing civilian clothes and performing diplomatic duties. Back on the station, Teth watched Walsh's security detail coordinate with station personnel. They established a perimeter around the diplomatic quarters without seeming to do so, created communication protocols with station security, and generally behaved like soldiers preparing for a siege. The emergency turned out to be exactly what it had been reported as: a minor hull breach caused by a maintenance accident. Repairs were completed within an hour, and normal operations resumed. But the human response had been fascinating to observe. "Your people certainly know how to handle emergencies," Teth commented, as Walsh's team finally stood down from their heightened alert status. "Experience teaches preparation," Walsh replied, his diplomatic demeanor fully restored. "We've learned that most problems are manageable if you're ready for them, and if you're not ready." Walsh's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then they're not manageable." As they parted ways for the evening, Teth reflected on what he had learned. The humans weren't hiding weapons. They were hiding the fact that they thought like warriors even while acting like diplomats. Every response, every precaution, every backup plan spoke of people who had learned to expect the worst possible outcome. The question remained: what had taught them to think this way? What experiences had shaped an entire species to approach every situation like a potential battlefield? Standing at his quarters viewing window, Teth looked out at the peaceful star field and wondered what dangers humans saw in that same darkness. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start looking for answers in places Walsh couldn't control, in the historical records and databases that contained humanity's real story. Something had made the humans into what they were today. Understanding that something was the key to understanding whether they were humanity's friends or its greatest potential threat. The Galactic Council Station's central archive stretched through 7 levels of the structure's core, containing the collected knowledge of 43 different species across 12,000 years of recorded history. Ambassador Teth had spent countless hours in similar archives, but he had never searched for anything quite like this before. The morning shift brought fewer researchers, which suited Teth perfectly. He settled into a private study alcove and began his investigation into humanity's past with the systematic approach that had made him successful in diplomatic service. Start with the basics, he told himself, then dig deeper until the patterns emerge. The first surprise came immediately. Human historical records were incredibly detailed and remarkably honest. Most species tended to gloss over their more violent periods when contributing to galactic archives, focusing instead on cultural achievements and technological advances. Humans had included everything: wars, genocides, environmental disasters, political collapses, and social upheavals that spanned millennia. Teth's compound eyes widened as he scrolled through the timeline of human conflict. The 100 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, 2 world wars that killed millions, something called the Cold War that lasted decades and nearly ended in planetary destruction, civil wars, religious wars, territorial wars, resource wars, an almost unbroken chain of violence stretching back to the earliest recorded history. But there was something else in the records that disturbed him even more. Natural disasters that would have destroyed most civilizations had barely slowed human development. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for years, ice ages that should have caused extinction, plagues that killed half the population, asteroid impacts, solar flares, earthquakes that leveled entire cities. Each time, humans had not just survived but learned from the experience. They built better early warning systems. They developed more robust infrastructure. They created backup plans for backup plans. Every disaster had taught them new ways to prepare for the next one. The afternoon brought more disturbing revelations. Teth discovered references to something humans called the Great Filter, their term for whatever prevented most species from reaching interstellar civilization. Human philosophers and scientists had spent centuries studying the concept, trying to understand why the galaxy seemed so empty despite billions of years for life to develop. Their conclusion was chilling. Most species, humans believed, destroyed themselves before reaching the stars, either through war, environmental collapse, resource depletion, or simple inability to cooperate on a planetary scale. The fact that humans had survived their own development was, in their view, something close to a miracle. This explained so much about human behavior. They weren't paranoid. They were experienced survivors who had learned that existence itself was hostile. Every weapon, every defensive system, every backup plan was insurance against an uncaring universe that had tried to kill them for thousands of years. Teth found himself reading late into the evening cycle, absorbed by the horror and fascination of human history. Their literature reflected their experiences, stories of survival against impossible odds, heroes who succeeded through preparation and determination, cautionary tales about what happened to those who weren't ready for disaster. The historical records painted a picture of a species that had been forged in fire and emerged harder than steel. They had survived everything their planet could throw at them, from natural disasters to their own worst impulses, and the experience had shaped their entire worldview. The next morning, Teth approached the archives with renewed purpose. If humans had survived so much on their homeworld, what had convinced them to carry that same level of preparation into space? The answer came in a file marked with the highest security classifications, something called the Mumbai event. The records were sparse but terrifying. 37 years ago, humanity's first deep space colony had been attacked by unknown aliens. Not contacted, attacked. Without warning, without provocation, without any attempt at communication. 3. Ships of unknown design had simply appeared in the system and begun systematically destroying everything humans had built there. The colony's defenses had been minimal. Early human space settlements focused on survival against environmental hazards, not military threats. They had managed to send one distress signal before the attack destroyed their communication array. The human response had been swift and decisive. A military fleet had arrived to find the colony in ruins and the attackers gone. 12,000 colonists dead. Infrastructure destroyed. No survivors, no prisoners, no explanation. The attacking ships had simply vanished into deep space, leaving behind only destruction and questions. The psychological impact on humanity had been profound. Here was proof that the galaxy contained threats they hadn't prepared for. The Great Filter wasn't just about surviving your own development. It was about surviving contact with others who might have already passed through that filter and emerged as something hostile. Human space development had changed overnight. Every ship became a potential warship. Every colony became a fortress. Every citizen became a potential defender. The Mumbai event had taught humanity that the universe was not just indifferent. It could be actively hostile. Teth sat back in his study, alcove overwhelmed by what he had learned. Human preparedness wasn't aggression. It was trauma response on a species-wide scale. They armed themselves because experience had taught them that being unarmed meant being victims. But there was one more layer to uncover. Teth accessed the most recent files in the human archives, looking for evidence of how they had adapted to galactic society. What he found was both reassuring and deeply sad. Humans desperately wanted to be part of the galactic community. Their diplomatic records showed genuine enthusiasm for peaceful cooperation and cultural exchange. But they couldn't shake the lessons their history had taught them. Every interaction was filtered through the lens of potential threat assessment. Every new species was evaluated for hostile capabilities. Every peaceful overture was accompanied by careful defensive preparations. They wanted to trust, but they didn't know how to stop preparing for betrayal. The final piece of the puzzle came in a series of internal human government documents that had been declassified for diplomatic purposes. Policy papers discussing humanity's integration into galactic society revealed the depth of their internal struggle. Human leaders understood that their defensive preparations made other species nervous. They recognized that their constant readiness for violence seemed threatening to races that had never experienced large-scale warfare. But they also couldn't bring themselves to disarm in a galaxy where they had already encountered one hostile species. The documents contained detailed analyses of every council member species, not for conquest but for defense. Human strategists had carefully studied Rilani hive mind coordination, Korhen industrial capabilities, Valari technological achievements, not to defeat them, but to understand how to defend against them if peaceful coexistence failed. It was the mindset of a species that hoped for the best but planned for the worst, because their entire evolutionary history had taught them that the worst was not only possible, but probable. Teth spent his final hours in the archives reading human philosophy and literature from the space age, writers and thinkers who grappled with humanity's place in the galaxy, their responsibility to other species, their fear of repeating old patterns of violence and conflict. What emerged was the portrait of a species trying desperately to evolve beyond their survival instincts while remaining true to the lessons that had kept them alive. They wanted to be peaceful explorers and cultural ambassadors, but they couldn't forget that they were, first and foremost, survivors. As Teth made his way back to his quarters, his mind raced with implications. Humanity's defensive preparations weren't a threat to galactic peace. They were the inevitable result of a species that had learned to survive in a hostile universe. The weapons and defensive systems weren't tools for conquest, but for protection against a cosmos that had already tried to destroy them multiple times. The question now was whether the Galactic Council could understand and accept humanity's unique perspective, or whether fear of human capabilities would drive the galaxy toward the very conflict that humans spent so much energy trying to prevent. Tomorrow, he would confront Ambassador Walsh with what he had learned. It was time for honest conversation between species that had taken very different paths to the stars. The night cycle on Galactic Council Station created an illusion of evening that helped various species maintain their circadian rhythms. Ambassador Teth had chosen this quiet time deliberately, requesting a private meeting with Ambassador Walsh, away from the formal diplomatic spaces and official protocols. The small observation lounge on level 12 offered privacy and a spectacular view of the binary star system that illuminated this corner of space. Walsh arrived exactly on time, carrying 2 cups of what Teth recognized as human coffee, a beverage that seemed to be equal parts stimulant and social ritual among their species. The human diplomat looked different in the dimmed lighting, less polished and more tired than his public appearances suggested. "Thank you for agreeing to meet privately, Ambassador." Teth gestured toward the comfortable seating arranged near the viewing windows. I hope we can speak more freely than diplomatic protocol usually allows. That depends on what you want to discuss. Walsh settled into his chair and took a sip of his coffee. Even in this informal setting, Teth noticed, the human positioned himself to watch both the entrance and the viewing window. You mentioned wanting to understand human culture better. Teth activated a privacy shield around their seating area, a common diplomatic courtesy that prevented electronic surveillance but wouldn't stop physical observation. I've spent the last 2 days researching your people's history. The archives contain fascinating information about humanity's development. Something shifted in Walsh's posture, a subtle tightening that spoke of increased alertness. The archives contain a lot of information about many things. What specifically interested you? The Mumbai event. The effect was immediate and profound. Walsh's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips, and for a moment his diplomatic mask slipped completely. Pain, anger, and something deeper, a bone-deep weariness, flickered across his features before he regained control. That's not something we usually discuss in casual diplomatic conversation. Walsh set his cup down carefully, as if afraid his hands might shake. It's still classified at the highest levels, but it's in the Council archives, available to any diplomat with sufficient clearance. Teth leaned forward, letting his genuine sympathy show in his voice and posture. I'm not asking out of idle curiosity, Ambassador. I need to understand why humans approach every situation like they're preparing for war. Walsh stared out the viewing window for a long moment, watching the distant stars wheel slowly past. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on the entire conversation. 12,000 people died at Mumbai. Families, children, scientists, engineers, artists. People who had dedicated their lives to building something beautiful and peaceful in the darkness between stars. His hands clenched into fists, then slowly relaxed. They died because we weren't prepared for the possibility that someone might want to kill them for no reason other than that they existed. The attackers never attempted communication. Never. No warnings, no demands, no attempts at contact of any kind. They simply appeared and began methodically destroying everything we had built. The attack pattern was designed for maximum psychological impact. They could have killed everyone in the first few minutes, but instead they took hours, made sure our people knew they were going to die. Walsh's voice remained steady, but Teth could see the effort it cost him. This wasn't ancient history to humans. It was a fresh wound that hadn't healed. We learned several important lessons. That day, Walsh continued. First, that the galaxy contains species capable of casual genocide. Second, that peaceful intentions don't protect you from hostile ones. Third, that being unprepared for violence is the same as being prepared to be victims. But surely one incident doesn't justify. One incident. Walsh turned from the window, and his eyes held a hardness that reminded Teth of military weapons, rather than diplomatic discourse. Ambassador, that was just our introduction to the reality of existence. Our species has a saying, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is enemy action. We've experienced everything the universe has to offer, natural disasters, resource scarcity, pandemic disease, environmental collapse, and our own worst impulses. Mumbai just confirmed what we already knew, which is, that preparation is the difference between survival and extinction. That hope is a luxury you can only afford if you're ready for disappointment. That peaceful cooperation is wonderful when everyone agrees to participate, but deadly when someone decides not to. Walsh picked up his coffee again, using the movement to compose himself. When he continued, his voice had returned to its diplomatic register, but the underlying steel remained. You want to know why humans are so armed, Ambassador Teth? Because we've learned that the universe doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't matter if you're peaceful or aggressive, kind or cruel, advanced or primitive. What matters is whether you're prepared when something tries to kill you. Teth felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. You see the galaxy as hostile. No, we see the galaxy as indifferent. Hostility at least acknowledges your existence. Indifference means you're responsible for your own survival, and no one will save you if you're not strong enough to save yourself. The human diplomat stood and moved to the viewing window, staring out at the stars with an expression that mixed longing and wariness in equal measure. Do you know what humans call the space between stars, Ambassador? The deep dark. Not because it's unlit, but because it's unknown. Every light out there could hide friends or enemies, wonders or weapons. We've learned not to assume which. But surely you don't expect every species to be hostile? Walsh laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Of course not. Most species are probably peaceful. Most encounters will likely be positive. Most first contacts will end in friendship and cooperation. He turned back to face Teth directly. But most isn't the same as all, and the ones who aren't peaceful can destroy everything the peaceful ones have built. So humans prepare for the worst-case scenario in every situation? We prepare for everything we can imagine, then try to imagine worse things to prepare for. Walsh returned to his seat, but his relaxation seemed forced. It's not paranoia when you have historical evidence that bad things happen to good people who aren't ready for them. Teth felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The weapons, the defensive systems, the constant alertness, it's all insurance. Insurance, preparation, call it what you will. We've learned that peaceful species survive by being too strong to attack, not by being too weak to threaten anyone. Walsh took another sip of coffee. Every human knows the stories of species that trusted in universal goodwill and universal peace. We know how those stories end. How do they end? They don't. Those species stop existing. The silence that followed stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Teth found himself grappling with a worldview so fundamentally different from his own that it felt like learning an alien language. Ambassador Walsh, I have to ask, do humans see the Rilani as a potential threat? Walsh's smile was sad, but genuine. Ambassador, humans see everyone as a potential threat. Not because we want to fight you, but because we can't afford to be wrong if you decide to fight us. It's nothing personal. We prepare for the possibility that our best friends might become our worst enemies because we've seen it happen before. That seems like a very lonely way to exist. It is. Walsh's admission carried a weight that seemed to fill the observation lounge. But it's also the reason we still exist to feel lonely. Every human child learns the same lesson. Hope for peace, prepare for war, trust but verify, and never ever assume that good intentions are enough to protect you. As the two diplomats sat in contemplative silence, Teth realized that he had been asking the wrong questions from the beginning. The issue wasn't whether humans were aggressive or peaceful. It was whether the galaxy could accept a species that had learned to survive in ways that other races found disturbing. Outside the viewing window, the stars continued their eternal dance, beautiful and distant and utterly indifferent to the small concerns of the species that moved between them. For the first time in his life, Teth looked at that starfield and wondered what might be looking back. The Grand Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Council had witnessed many historic moments over the centuries, but few debates had drawn such attention from across the galaxy. Representatives from 43 member species filled the curved seating areas, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of galactic diversity. Ambassador Teth stood at the central podium, acutely aware that his next words would determine humanity's future in the galactic community. High Counselor. Neth called the session to order with the traditional chime that had opened council meetings for over 1,000 years. The sound resonated through the chamber, bringing instant silence to the gathered delegates. Honored representatives, we gather today to address the formal inquiry into human military preparations and their implications for galactic security. Neth's elderly voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Ambassador Teth of the Rilani Republic has completed his investigation and will present his findings. Teth activated the holographic display system, showing the assembled delegates the same statistics that had started his investigation weeks ago. Human ship armaments, civilian weapon ownership, defensive preparations that exceeded anything seen from other council species. Honored counselors, when I began this investigation, I sought to answer a simple question. Why are humans so heavily armed? What I discovered forces us to ask a different question entirely. Teth paused, letting his words settle over the assembly. He could see the tension in the various species representatives, the Koran delegation leaning forward aggressively, the peaceful Mendi shifting nervously in their seats, the Valari maintaining their usual stoic composure. The question we should be asking is not why humans are so prepared for conflict, but why we are so unprepared for the realities of galactic existence. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Several delegates activated their translation devices, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing from a Rilani diplomat. Teth activated the next series of displays. In the past 1,000 years of council records, we have documented 17 species that simply vanished from known space. No distress signals, no explanations, no survivors. We classified these as migration events or technological ascension, because we preferred those explanations to the alternatives. The holographic display showed star maps with marked sectors where civilizations had once thrived, now empty and dark. During the same period, we have recorded 43 instances of what we termed natural disasters destroying established colonies. Solar flares, asteroid impacts, gamma-ray bursts, all unfortunate accidents of cosmic timing. Ambassador Korvash of the Korhan Empire rose from his seat, his scaled features showing obvious irritation. Ambassador Teth, these statistics are well known. What does this have to do with human militarization? Everything, Ambassador Korvash. Because humans have studied these same records and reached different conclusions. Teth shifted the display to show human analysis of the same data. Human statisticians and strategists have identified patterns that we missed or chose to ignore. The random disasters show signs of artificial origin. The vanished species all shared certain characteristics: advanced technology, but minimal defensive capabilities. The chamber erupted in concerned voices. High Counselor Neth called for order, but the damage was done. Fear had entered the equation. You're suggesting that some unknown force has been systematically eliminating peaceful civilizations? The question came from Ambassador Yeath of the Mendi, her crystalline form pulsing with distressed colors. I'm suggesting that humans believe this to be a possibility, and their entire cultural evolution has prepared them for such threats. Teth activated the final display, a detailed analysis of human defensive preparations viewed through the lens of threat assessment rather than aggression. Every human ship carries enough firepower to defend against superior numbers. Every human colony maintains evacuation procedures and defensive positions. Every human citizen learns basic survival and combat skills. This isn't the behavior of conquerors. This is the behavior of survivors who have learned that peaceful intentions don't guarantee peaceful outcomes. Ambassador Walsh rose from the human delegation seating. He had remained silent throughout the presentation, but now his presence commanded attention from the entire assembly. Honored counselors, may I be permitted to address the assembly? Neth nodded, and Walsh moved to stand beside Teth at the central podium. The human diplomat looked older than he had during their private conversation, carrying the weight of speaking for his entire species. Ambassador Teth has presented our position accurately, but incompletely. Yes, humans prepare for conflict because we've learned that unpreparedness equals extinction. Yes, we arm ourselves because we've seen what happens to those who cannot defend themselves. But there's something more important that needs to be said. Walsh activated his own display system, showing images of human space, colonies, ships, research stations, all bristling with defensive systems, but engaged in peaceful activities. We don't want to be the galaxy's warriors. We don't want to be the species that everyone fears. We want to be explorers, scientists, artists, philosophers, all the things that make civilization beautiful and meaningful. His voice carried genuine emotion. But we've learned that you can only pursue peaceful goals if you're strong enough to protect them from those who would destroy them. And what if there are no such threats? The challenge came from Ambassador Renth of the Valari. What if your preparations are based on paranoia rather than reality? Walsh's smile was sad but determined. Then we will have spent resources on weapons we never needed and maintained vigilance against enemies who never came. We'll have worried for nothing and prepared for threats that didn't exist. He paused, letting the silence stretch. But if we're right, and we're unprepared, then none of us will be alive to regret the mistake. Teth stepped forward again, knowing this was the critical moment of his entire presentation. Honored counselors, I propose that we stop viewing human preparedness as a threat and start viewing it as an opportunity. The chamber fell silent. Every delegate focused their attention on the small Rilani ambassador who was about to propose something unprecedented in galactic history. For 1,000 years, the Galactic Council has operated on the assumption that peaceful intentions create peaceful outcomes. We've built our civilization on cooperation, shared knowledge, and mutual trust. These are beautiful ideals, and they've served us well. Teth paused, looking around the chamber at faces representing dozens of different evolutionary paths. But humans have shown us something we didn't want to see, that our peaceful civilization exists in a universe that may not be entirely peaceful. What are you proposing? High Counselor Neth's voice carried a mixture of curiosity and concern. I propose that we embrace humanity's unique perspective instead of fearing it. Let humans handle the galaxy's security concerns, while the rest of us focus on the things we do best: science, exploration, culture, diplomacy. Let them be our guardians, while we remain our best selves. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some delegates voiced immediate opposition. The idea of a single species handling galactic defense seemed dangerous. Others showed interest. The logic of specialization had appeal. The debate that followed lasted for hours, covering every aspect of the proposal from practical logistics to philosophical implications. In the end, it was Ambassador Walsh who provided the deciding argument. Honored counselors, humans don't want to rule the galaxy or impose our will on other species. We want to protect the diversity and beauty that makes galactic civilization worth preserving. Give us a chance to prove that strength can serve peace instead of destroying it. The vote was closer than Teth had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 26 species voted to approve the new framework, 15 opposed and 2 abstained. Humanity would become the Galactic Council's official guardian species, responsible for defense and security, while other species continued their traditional roles. 6 months later, Teth found himself aboard a human military training vessel observing the implementation of the new arrangement. The ship buzzed with activity as human instructors worked with volunteers from other species, teaching defensive tactics and emergency procedures that had never been needed before but might someday save lives. Standing on the ship's observation deck, Teth watched human patrol vessels moving through space in precise formations. They carried enough firepower to sterilize planets, but their mission was protection, not conquest. Early reports showed that piracy had dropped to almost nothing in sectors under human patrol. Trade routes were safer. Scientific expeditions could work without fear. Second thoughts, Ambassador? Walsh had approached quietly, a habit that still made Teth's compound eyes twitch. No second thoughts. But I do find myself wondering what we might have missed if we had never met your species. Teth gestured toward the starfield beyond the ship's hull. How many peaceful civilizations might have been lost while we congratulated ourselves on our enlightened ideals? Maybe none. Maybe we're wrong about the dangers out there. Walsh joined him at the viewing window. I hope we're wrong. I hope we spend the next 1,000 years protecting you from threats that never come. But you'll keep watching anyway. We'll keep watching, we'll keep preparing. We'll keep being ready for the worst while hoping for the best. Walsh's reflection in the transparent aluminum showed a man at peace with his burden. It's what we do, Ambassador. It's what we've always done. Outside the viewing window, the stars continued their eternal dance, beautiful and mysterious and full of possibilities. Some of those possibilities might be wonderful: new friends, new knowledge, new wonders to explore. Others might be terrible, threats that could destroy everything they had built together. But now, for the first time in galactic history, someone was watching the darkness between the stars and preparing for both possibilities. The galaxy's peaceful species could continue to hope for the best, secure in the knowledge that others were prepared for the worst. It wasn't the future that any of them had planned, but it was a future they could all live with. And sometimes, Teth reflected, survival was more important than perfection.